Aducanumab, or I'm going to call it BIB-037, it's a little easier. It was tested in 166 patients. It's an exciting result. There was what appeared to be a dose-dependent reduction in the brain amyloid and a similar dose-dependent reduction in the rate of decline on two clinical instruments, the Clinical Dementia Rating, or CDR, and the Mini-Mental State Examination. There are many things we do not know about BIB-037, but the preliminary data in terms of efficacy is extremely exciting.
And is it the first time that treatment, a drug, makes it so far in the testing, in a study?
Well, there have been many monoclonal antibodies, and there are monoclonal antibodies in the field. Solanezumab and gantenerumab are still tested. Crenezumab is being considered. So there are a number of agents that are monoclonal antibodies that are being tested. This is the first monoclonal antibody in which we have seen this kind of biomarker documentation that we are engaging the amyloid target. That's one of the things that distinguishes BIB-037 from other monoclonals whose preliminary results we have available to us.
That's the best results ever in the testing of these kind of molecules.
Yes, this is the most compelling result that we've seen in terms of dose dependency, time dependency. That is, there was hair removal at 12 months than there was at 6 months, and also a related cognitive response. So that's a more comprehensive picture than we've had on other monoclonal antibodies.
It was active on Alzheimer's and early stage Alzheimer's. We know if it's going to be active against other stages or advanced stages of Alzheimer's.
Biogen has presented data about prodromal Alzheimer's disease and mild Alzheimer's disease dementia. And BIB-037 was equally effective in both of these patient groups. Of course, we're talking about very small numbers here, but these were the data that they presented at the American Academy of Neurology. We don't know what would work in moderate or severe stages, and of course, using a disease-modifying course earlier makes more sense in terms of optimizing patients' response. It's important to remember that nobody got better in this trial. What we're showing is that the patients declined more slowly, and at the high dose, they declined very little over the 1 year observation. That's what we expect a disease-modifying agent to do. So, working really to try to slow the disease, not reverse the symptoms, and so it makes more sense to do that in the earlier phase of the illness.
These encouraging results haven't been observed in any other studies?
Well, in the original studies of the vaccination, AM 1792, when one of those patients came to biopsy, there was what looked like removal of amyloid. Now, it's a very selected sample. It's a small sample. There are many nuances to that statement. But it looked like there was a removal of amyloid, but there was no interruption of the cognitive decline. I would say that's the only other clinical trial in which we have reasonably compelling data that the monoclonal did what we wanted it to do, which was, or that the immunotherapy did wanted it to do, which is to remove the brain amyloid to see whether that would interrupt the clinical decline, which it seemed to in the BIB study.
And what are the side effects?
There were substantial side effects in the BIB-037 study, particularly at the higher doses and particularly in the E4 carriers, that is the apolipoprotein E4 genotype carriers. So at the higher doses, 55% of the patients, or slightly over half, had evidence of ARIA, amyloid-related imaging abnormalities. Very few of those were symptomatic, but some of them were symptomatic. It was also common to have headache. So headache was the most common symptomatic side effect. So we are going to have to understand the effects, the management of the side effects, the relation of the side effects to the therapeutic response as we get the opportunity to work with BIB037.
And aside from headaches, were headaches the side effect, the symptoms of the first side effects you were talking about?
Yes.
The imaging.
Headaches were the most apparent side effects that were seen, the highest reported, the only one that was reported in a substantial number of patients, and then the ARIA is observed, the amyloid-related imaging abnormalities are observed by MRI. Most of those are asymptomatic, but some of them become symptomatic, and it's very important for us to understand those patients who become symptomatic, and does it increase their long-term ability? That's a very, very important question for this agent.
This results from phase 1B, and Biogen is skipping from phase 1B to phase 3. Has it ever done before, this passing through from 1 to 3?
It is not so uncommon that a company would choose to go directly from to phase 3. Phase 2, if it's powered to see a cognitive response, is often as large as a phase 3 study. So it becomes a kind of a vocabulary issue as to whether or not these are phase 2 or phase 3 studies. I think what we're seeing here is enough confidence in the small group of patients who have been studied already to take this to the level of study that could be presented to the FDA at regulatory standards.
So that would be the next step?
Yes, the next step in advancing BIB037 as we understand it from what's been announced far is it will be advanced to phase 3. That'll be 2 large, fully powered studies that would provide pivotal information adequate if the drug is shown to be efficacious in these trials to qualify for FDA approval.
And what would these trials look like? Would be a larger amount of patients?
Yes, it will be larger trials. Of course, the nature of the trial is not publicly available, but one would estimate, based on the previous trial, that they would use amyloid imaging to identify the patients, to ensure that the target is present in the patients to be treated, that they will have to narrow the dose range. So they tested 1, 3, 6, and 10 milligram doses in the phase 1 study. I would estimate they are not going to take that full number of doses ahead. And it'll be a large number of patients, so it'll be adequately powered to see the results across a repertoire of clinical outcomes, including functional outcome, cognitive outcomes, global outcomes, and possibly behavioral outcomes.
And based on the first results of phase 1B, do you think that we can expect an effective treatment against Alzheimer's?
Well, I think this has generated a lot of optimism in the field. The observation that this drug seemed to reduce brain amyloid and there seemed to be a corresponding reduction in rate of decline. This is what we've been trying to do. And I think people were beginning to wonder whether we could effectively target amyloid. Is it tractable? If it's tractable, does it have a therapeutic implication of reduced levels? So I think this trial has been confidence building in terms of amyloid as a target and in terms of our ability to meaningfully therapeutically intervene.
Amyloid plaque is not confirmed as the real cause, is it?
Well, I think this supports the primacy of the role of amyloid in Alzheimer's disease. Of course, there's a lot of evidence that amyloid is critical to the pathogenesis. There's also a lot of evidence that there are key other factors, particularly tau, neurofibrillary tangles, of course, event cell death, and it may be that in order to arrest disease over a long period of time or begin to reverse some of the cognitive losses our patients experience, that we'll need to have combinations of therapies, or that we could treat patients later in the disease with tau-related agents and earlier the disease with amyloid-related agents. These are all research questions to answer. But I think that the field does have a new enthusiasm based on the BIB037 results.
And this is the best results so far.
Yes, these are the best results that we have seen in a monoclonal antibody trial. It's been very hard to find agents that have an effect on brain amyloid and to allow us to explore the relationship between the amyloid in the brain and the cognitive function of the patients.
Is it true that Aducanumab was first a cancer-related treatment?
I'm sorry, Florence, I didn't quite catch that.
Well, I heard that Aducanumab was first a cancer treatment. Is that right?
I had not heard that.
No? Okay. So, how do you use treatment? What form has it?
BIB037 is administered as an intravenous infusion once monthly. So a person in a 12-month trial would have the monthly infusions over the course of the year. I think it's likely that patients would require this over long periods of time because, of course, the amyloid is still being generated in the brain even after removing. I think eventually we would whether we could give it less frequently, and that might be one maintenance strategy. But again, these are all questions to be answered after we know with greater confidence, based on larger patient sample size, Aducanumab sustains what looks like its early problem.
And finally, what do you think of this treatment?
Well, I like some scientists, have been looking for an agent that had a convincing marker effect and a convincing cognitive benefit. And I think Aducanumab, the data on this small group of patients seems to fulfill those criteria. The fact that it was dose-related, the fact that it was time-related, that it was independent disease state, these are very, very encouraging signs, and I'm delighted that Biogen is advancing the drug into phase 3 to allow us to see its effect in a larger number of patients.
Thank you. Would you have just a little second? Something just popped in this. Yes, it's gone. Would you have anything else to add?
As we wrote Aducanumab, I think we'll be trying to understand the relationship between the efficacy in terms of biomarker removal, therapeutic benefit, and the toxicity, that is the ARIA. What's the optimal dose? What's the optimal dosing strategy? How often will patients have to be infused? I think these are all questions that need to be answered in order to make sure that we are as giving our patients as benefit as possible while exposing them to least possible harm.
If the results are all positive or enough positive to take this drug on the market, how much time do you think it will take until available for the public?
It's difficult to estimate the development timelines on an agent. They are long. Patient recruitment takes quite a long time. It will depend on whether they choose more mild dementia, more prodromal patients. It's harder to identify the prodromal patients that are amyloid positive. I think a time frame of 6 years is probably realistic in terms of if the trials went smoothly, if the FDA submission went quickly, when we could expect a drug on the market and widely available.
At Biogen, we're talking about 2018. Is that realistic?
Well, that seems very optimistic to me. Um, in order to reach a large number of patients, usually takes 18 months or 2 years. The trial won't start until the end of 2015, so that already takes us to at least mid of 2017, and at least a 1-year exposure of the last patient in. That would easily take us to 2018. Average review time of a drug submitted to the FDA is 18 months, so that already takes us to 2020. I would estimate that these are going to be longer time frames than perhaps you've heard from other experts.